Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a really fascinating and honestly pretty complex question, all based on our source material: how do Islamic end-time beliefs stack up against biblical prophecy? And what we find when we put them side by side is a startling set of parallels. It's like a perfect, inverse reflection of one another.
And really, at the heart of this whole comparison is a profound question of identity. As we're going to see, the key figures in one prophecy seem to be the mirror opposite of the other. The person one tradition calls a savior, the other seems to identify as the ultimate deceiver.
All right, so here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start by just looking at the two big picture visions of the end. Then we'll dive into the biblical Antichrist and its Islamic counterpart, the savior known as the Mahdi. From there, we'll look at the very different roles of Jesus, or Isa, and the Islamic deceiver, the Dajjal, before we put it all together and see this prophetic mirror image take shape.
You know, lots of cultures and religions have some kind of vision for the end of the world, what's called eschatology. But our sources point out a really unique and compelling parallel between the biblical and Islamic accounts, one that kind of makes you stop and take a closer look.
Now, just to be super clear, our goal here isn't to figure out who's right or who's wrong. We're simply laying out the analysis that's presented in our sources. We're going to focus completely on the direct comparisons between the key figures and the events they're supposed to kick off. Okay, first things first. To even begin to understand this comparison, we need to set a baseline from the biblical perspective. So let's talk about the figure most people know is the Antichrist. And this is absolutely crucial to get. The original Greek term doesn't just mean against Christ, it also means in the place of Christ. So we're not just talking about an enemy, we're talking about a counterfeit, a great deceiver who's going to try and replace the real Messiah. And you can really get a sense of how significant this figure is just by looking at all the different names he's given in the Bible. We're talking dozens of titles across the Old and New Testaments: the Beast, the Lawless One, the Man of Sin, all pointing to this one central bad guy.
So the picture we get is of this incredibly charismatic political leader who rises to global power. He doesn't show up looking like a monster from day one. No, his rise is all about political skill and promises of peace, especially a 7-year peace treaty involving Israel. Deception is his game.
All right, so we've got our biblical baseline. Now, let's flip the coin and look at the other side of this mirror. Let's talk about the central messianic figure in Islamic end-time belief, a savior they call the Mahdi. So who is the Mahdi? Well, in Islamic tradition, he's seen as the supreme leader politically, militarily, and religiously for all Muslims. His destiny is to unite the entire world under a global Islamic government, a caliphate. And right here, wow, this is where we see the first major parallel that our sources point out. It's kind of stunning, actually. Both are described as global political leaders. Both are associated with a 7-year treaty. The core mission is described in remarkably similar terms. The parallels don't stop there. They actually get even more intense when we look at the figure of Jesus. But his role in the end times, well, it's defined very, very differently in each tradition, creating another one of these stark mirror images. I mean, the contrast here is just staggering. In one story, Jesus is the ultimate returning king and savior. But in the other, this figure, Isa, comes back to actually abolish the very religion built around his name and to serve as a subordinate to the Mahdi. Okay, so if the Mahdi is the savior in the Islamic story, then who's the bad guy? Who's the great deceiver? Well, that role is filled by a figure known as the Dajjal. The Dajjal's whole mission, according to the sources, is to deceive humanity by pretending to be the Messiah. But it's the details of who he claims to be and who he targets that create what might be the most startling inversion of them all. Just look at this inversion. The main characteristics of the villain in the Islamic narrative, that he claims to be the Jewish Messiah and performs amazing miracles, are almost like a twisted caricature, a dark reflection of the biblical Messiah, Jesus Christ. So when you lay all these pieces out, side by side, what our sources argue is that you don't just see a few coincidences. You see a near-perfect role reversal. You see a prophetic mirror image. Think about that for a second. The hero of one story is the villain of the other. The figure Christians identify as the Antichrist has the same job description as the Islamic savior, the Mahdi. And conversely, the Islamic arch-villain, the Dajjal, looks an awful lot like a warped version of the biblical Jesus. This perfect flip, well, it brings us to one of the Bible's greatest mysteries.
Yeah, could this whole mirror image thing actually unlock one of the Bible's most famous puzzles, the number of the beast?
The source material we're looking at offers a really fascinating, though definitely controversial, take on 666 that fits this theme, well, perfectly.
So the Book of Revelation gives the number of the beast in Greek letters, chi, z, and sigma. Now, traditionally, these are given numerical values 600, 60, and 6. Add them up, you get 666. Simple, right? But what if they aren't numbers at all?
So, one of our sources floats this really provocative idea. What if John, who wrote Revelation, wasn't seeing Greek letters? What if he was supernaturally shown some symbols from a language he didn't know? Symbols that would one day be at the very heart of Islam.
If you look at it this way, the Greek key looks a lot like the Arabic script for Bismillah, in the name of. The Z has a striking resemblance to the name Allah, and the sigma, it looks like crossed swords, a famous symbol of Islam that you often see on the headbands or armbands of Islamic fighters. So what this interpretation suggests is that the mark of the beast might not be a barcode or a microchip. Instead, it could be a declaration, a public allegiance to a different God and his messianic world leader. Now, whether you buy into this theory or not, you have to admit it ties this famous prophecy directly to the core creed of Islam, and it really does complete that incredible mirror image we've been talking about.
Which leaves us with a really profound question to think about, doesn't it? If prophecy is like a roadmap to the future, what does it mean when two maps seem to be describing the exact same journey, but are just being read in opposite directions?